It's a real pleasure to have with us today Donald Cammel. Donald, welcome to be here.
So I served five presidents, starting with LBJ, followed by Richard Nixon. We were back in the age of copper wires you twist together and no internet, no cell phones, so we had a lot of challenges.
How many times was Richard Nixon out here? And they said to me, once.
Right.
And you told me today, 31?
I think he probably was out here about 31 times.
31. What happened during Watergate? Where were you? Where was he? Because there was rumors that he was around here when it happened.
He was on Walker's Cay the night of the break.
So that could be true, really. Wow. Out of the five presidents, who was your favorite?
Hands down, Ronald Reagan was my favorite.
I'd like to know, did LBJ actually talk to world leaders sitting on the loo? Is that true?
Well, that's a rumor, but it is true. And he would call secretaries in to take dictation when he's sitting on the john. So
okay. You heard it right here from the communications agent.
It was pretty spicy.
Welcome to The Outdoors with Carl Allen. This is our new podcast. Not that there aren't enough in the world already. I have many very interesting people that will visit me, whether it's about Walker's Cay and our fishing adventures, or our exploration fleet and treasure hunting, or even our land in Tennessee for hunting. So I figured, why not sit down with these folks and let them tell their story? Please tune in, like and subscribe, and follow on all social media platforms. Welcome to another episode of Outdoors with Carl Allen, and today we have a very special guest. He served on the White House Communications Agency through 5 presidents, and it's a real pleasure to have with us today Donald Cammel. Donald, welcome to be here.
Well, thank you. The last 2 days have been very exciting to come back to Walker's Cay after a 49 plus year absence. I'm just overwhelmed with everything I've seen out here. You're bringing Walker's Cay back to life, turning it into a world-class resort.
Oh, well, thank you, Donald. You've got an amazing history here. We've been walking around. Everywhere we stop, there's a story. But before we get into that, please tell us a little bit about yourself. I believe you started in the Army. We talked about that. You're basic at Fort
Leonard Wood, Missouri.
There you go.
Okay, well, basically, I grew up in a very small town in Kansas, a little white spot in the road, about 4,000 people, Eureka, Kansas, and went to college for 1 year, kind of ran out of money. The draft board was breathing down my back, told me I was going to get drafted, so I went down and I beat the draft. I enlisted. During my training, I was screened and selected for a special assignment. I wasn't quite sure where. It was first going to be an embassy, and then they kept escalating it. Next thing you know, I was assigned to the White House Communications Agency, and I ended up with duty. My first duty was at Camp David. I was expecting to go to D.C., and then they sent me to Camp David. I was a little disappointed, but it turned out that was the best thing that could have happened. So I served five presidents, starting with LBJ, followed by Richard Nixon, which brought me out to Walker's Cay, and then Nixon resigned, and Gerald Ford took over. When Gerald Ford took over, I was there for a very short time in the Ford administration. I then went out in the real Army for a few years because I basically got a great promotion. And then I came back towards the tail end of Jimmy Carter and the rest of Ronald Reagan's administration. So they were all different, all exciting. Separate stories, but the number one thing, our agency, we learned to respect the office of the president, and not some. We could like the guy that was in, but the main goal was to respect the office of the president and to make sure he could communicate, whether he was on a boat, horseback, walking a trail or whatever.
I'm a full-fledged deplorable, but we don't get into politics on this show here today. But tell me, when the agency. It's Camp David, it's Air Force One, it's Marine One.
Okay. The White House Comm Agency is responsible for only the communications for the president anywhere on a worldwide basis. They work under the guidance of the White House Military Office. The White House Military Office is supervisory control over Air Force One, Marine One, the White House Mess, the White House Medical Unit, and they have a White House Transportation Unit. So those all come under the umbrella of the military office. The White House Comm Agency deploys worldwide. We set up all the communications, anything with electrons, whether it be teletype, fax machines, telephones. And we were back in the age of copper wires you twist together and no internet, no cell phones, so we had a lot of challenges.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you said a kid with a phone today had way more than what you had back then.
Yes, sir. A third grade, fifth grade kid on a street corner today can communicate probably better worldwide than the president could 50 years ago.
Wow.
Yet we had to make sure he could communicate in a relatively short period of time from anywhere. And so we are eventually going to get around it. We had some great challenges out here to make that happen, because out here there was really no access off the island other than just a roll call HF radio a couple times a day.
Yeah. Well, before we get into walkers and the connection that we definitely got to talk about, I know my audience will want to know, out of the 5 presidents, who was your favorite?
Okay. All right. Well, hands down, Ronald Reagan was my favorite. But I have to qualify that, and I have to say that when I first got there, I was 21 years old. Pretty naive growing up in a small town in Kansas. Seafood said Mrs. Paul on it, and you come out to Walker's Cay, you learn that's a big difference. But LBJ probably taught me more about what the presidency was about. When he walked down the hallway, you'd see people getting out of the way like the wake behind a boat, ducking into hallways behind curtains. They didn't want a confrontation, but he knew how Congress worked. He got a lot of things pushed through Congress because that's where he came from, and I learned a lot about the presidency from LBJ. But as I went through the others, they all had their own unique little things. But Ronald Reagan was more like a grandfather to me. Because my responsibility had increased, I became the detachment commander at Camp David, the communications detachment commander. Had about 60 people working for me. That also meant that during visits, I would go down and watch movies at Camp David. There's a book out called Movie Night with the Reagans at Camp David. It's a very good book. It's a very exclusive club. I'm a member of that club. And we'd sit in there on Monday morning. I'd go to work, drive to work, and I'm thinking, how many generals in the Pentagon can go into work and say they watched a movie with the commander-in-chief on Friday and Saturday night? So it was really a special.
That's neat. And you were telling me a couple of times we talked about this, about your badge number. The number, I think today it's up to like 45,000 people. What was your badge number?
Okay, we're talking about the Presidential Service Badge. That's a badge that was first authorized. It started out as the White House Service Badge. It's now the Presidential Service Badge. And it was first initiated in 1962, 1963. And there's been 45,000 of them issued since then. My badge number was 2,162. I just attended a reunion of our alumni in Plains, Georgia, celebrating Jimmy Carter's 99th birthday about 3 weeks ago. And I was the most senior person there as far as longevity. There's a lot of people that outranked me as far as military rank, but back then it was very respectful as far as the lowest digit person was somebody that everybody would look up to. And I knew a lot of people that had 3-digit numbers, and those people were really icons.
Wow, it's the icons. So, you mentioned a guy that's still at Camp David, 39 years?
There's one person up there. He's been there about 38 years. I was his first detachment commander. He stayed there for an entire military career. Retired as a sergeant major in the Army, and then he took on a job as a GS civilian, and so now he's been there a total of 38 years. And I've made him promise that he's going to invite me back to Camp David again for his retirement ceremony,
which is a big deal. Yes.
But I have managed to go back to Camp David 2 times since I retired. I didn't think I'd ever get back inside the gate, but I was invited back for special occasions, and it's still as quaint and isolated as it's ever been. one of the only places other than Walker's Cay and Grand Cay where the president could walk out the front door in the morning and not have a camera shoved in his face.
That's what you told me earlier. Well, so I know people would be interested if you could come up with, an interesting story, your favorite or something. I mean, I'd like to know, did LBJ actually talk to world leaders sitting on the loo? Is that true?
Well, that's a rumor, but it is true. And he would call secretaries in to take dictation when he's sitting on the john. So that's
you
pretty.
Heard it right here from the communications agent.
It was pretty spicy. He could talk like a sailor. There was one occasion down at the ranch where he wanted to be connected with his brother, so he picked up the phone. The operator answered, "Yes, Mr. President." And he said, "Give me my brother," and then hangs up the phone. Well, now the operator's a brand new operator. It was the first presidential call he'd ever handled, and he looks at his supervisor and says he wants to talk to his brother. The supervisor says, "Which one?" So he has no choice, but he calls him back. So he calls him back. The president picks up. And he just dresses him down. I mean, this kid probably thinks he's headed to Vietnam. And just, cursing like a sailor and slams the phone down. He waits about 12 seconds. He knows when that phone goes off hook and the operator comes back on that kid is going to have melted into the chair, and it's going to be his supervisor that picks up the phone. So the supervisor picks up the phone. He's going to try to calm things down. And all he hears was, "And the same goes for you, too." Hangs up the phone.
Oh, God. That's good. Jeez. Well, I know a question that somebody like yourself, everybody wants to know, is there anything secretive you could tell us? Anything that's now it's been, Freedom of Information Act now.
Right, it's been 49 years.
Yes.
If I disclose right now that the President of the United States is going to be standing on the front steps of the post office in St. Louis tomorrow at noon, that's probably sensitive and classified because it would disclose where he's going to be. Once he's gone after noon, a lot of that stuff is no longer classified, unless the way I found out he was going to be there was through some, satellite imagery or something of that nature. So most of the stuff we did was very time sensitive, and then once the event was over, we can, for the most part, talk about it. And, but we had a lot of things getting ready for these sites. President would go somewhere for 4 hours. We might be out there for 5 days. He'd go overseas in a third world country where there's very little communications. We might be there for 3 weeks to a month. With President Nixon, I had the privilege of going to China in 1972, and we were over there for 45 days before he arrived. And we would have to give the Chinese a plan. We're going to apply power. We're going to turn on the switch. We're going to make a connector. If we'd leave out one step and we started to do something we hadn't put in our plan of the day, everything was time out. We had to write a new plan and start the next day. So it was very controlled.
We had a pretty neat moment today. We went over to Little Grand and we saw the pillbox, and yes. You called the Secret Service guys, the guys upstairs, or what?
Okay. All right. The presidential detail, it would always be headed by the special agent in charge, and the special agent in charge he'd be in charge of the presidential protective detail, and then he'd have an assistant. The two of them would always be present wherever the president was traveling, and then there'd be shift workers that would work round-the-clock shifts, sometimes 12-hour shifts, sometimes 8-hour shifts, and they would rotate out. Over at Grand Cay, there would always be the SAIC and the assistant, and then there'd be possibly a couple others at times, and then there'd be a doctor and the military aide, and then if there were any staff, which was not too likely, but if there's any staff, they would share the two. You call them pillboxes, we call them the cottages.
Sure,
right?
Yeah.
And they were very well equipped, but they didn't have any kitchen. All the food was catered to them and taken down by.
I mean, we walked in there today, and you said as we were walking in there, the last time I walked up these steps, I got invited to a poker game,
right.
And that just kind of hit me there. That was amazing.
I had gone over there to deliver a classified message, and our teletype service was here at Walker's Cay, and then we had to carry it over to Grand Cay by a 13-foot Boston whaler. And the weather was pretty bad, and I got over there, and it wasn't safe. It was barely safe to get over there.
I can imagine.
And then the return trip was postponed indefinitely, and they were playing their morning poker game. I think the poker game probably went on about 23 hours a day.
Well, what else do you do out there? You were there.
So they wanted somebody to sit in, so I go in there and sit in, and of course they'd been probably playing for several hours before I got there, so they were tired and probably a little adult beverages, and I did pretty well for a couple hours there, taking money from people that were on duty, and it was really fun.
We've got to talk about walkers. I mean, the way we met is you sent a note, I think, to my director of marketing, Henry Deere, and Henry's one of these guys where he'll filter stuff out for me, but this one he says, you need to see this one.
Okay.
And
all right. Well, I've been watching the rebirth of Walker's Cave for probably 2 years, and all of a sudden, about 9 months ago, Saturday morning, I'm thinking, man, this is just too fabulous. I got to say something. And so I click on that says contact us, and even though my wife says I can't tell a short story, I tried to put a few things in it. It was probably only 5 pages long. And I talked about how I had great memories from Walker's Cay. I used to travel when I was on active duty out to support the President of the United States, both during visits and during maintenance trips. So I've probably been out here about 30 times. And I said, I'm really excited watching your progress. I wish you the best of luck. And oh, by the way, when I win the Powerball, I'm going to call you and I'm going to come out. Hit send. And 12 minutes later, a phone rings. It's a 214 area code, which is the same as my USAA auto insurance. I figured something's wrong with the auto insurance. Wasn't sure I wanted to talk to him. I pick it up and hello, this is Carl Allen, CEO of Allen Exploration. Can we talk? Yes. So we had a fairly lengthy conversation, probably 45 minutes to an hour, and towards the end of the call, Carl Allen says to me, well, you are 76 years old, 77, are you capable of travel? And, well, yes. He says, well, when we get this up and running, I'd like to have you and your wife come out and be our guests. And I just almost fell out of my chair. I didn't know what. It took about a nanosecond to say absolutely yes. And then he said, well, that's going to be up and running in the summer of 2023. And summer was in the rearview mirror. And all of a sudden, then your operations manager, Henry Deere, he gives me a call. And he says, Mr. Allen, I'd like to apologize for not getting back to you sooner. The cabins aren't up and running like he expected, but he'd like you to come out and be his guest, he and his wife's guest on the Gigi. So I, of course, said yes, and then I go tell my wife, "Are you going to know how to act on a fairly substantially yacht?"
So far, so good, sir.
And I mentioned a number of what I thought the yacht might cost because I didn't know, and then I looked it up, and I only missed it by about 5 times its value because it's a much bigger boat than I imagined. So this has been being assigned to the White House is a great gift, great assignment, but it's a gift that kind of keeps on giving through life. I can attribute my second career to contacts I made with the communications people when I was working on active duty. Right. Went to work for Digital Microwave after I got out. So it's been a great ride.
You get this thing with your second wife. Well, I got to tell you, when we did talk and I said, I'm going to get you out here, the memories started flowing. And, we've talked a few times since then. Now, you knew Mr. Applin.
Yes, I did.
The previous owner of this island, and they were good friends with the Nixons.
Right. Mr. Applin and Bibi Rebozo were two of President Nixon's best friends, and they wanted to make sure he had a place he could come and relax. President Nixon was not the type that, I don't even know if he knew how to relax. He would get off of Air Force One, he'd helicopter over to Key Biscayne, he'd go in there and take his 3-piece suit off and put on a sport coat and tie, and then sit by the pool, turn on the gas fireplace and the air conditioner at the same time, and watch his girls swim in Biscayne Bay where they had a shark net to keep the sharks out. And that was relaxation. And that was on Friday night. Saturday morning, he'd get up with Bibi Rebozo, and they'd fly out here. And that's...
Well, what was so wild today, we're riding in the golf cart with Stevie, and you're sitting in the front, and you had told me about the path that goes down to the beach, and before you said it to Stevie, Stevie goes, "This is the path where Nixon used to go down, right near that building."
Right.
And you said that the Secret Service would literally form around him so they would get eaten before he would by a shark.
That's correct.
Yeah.
They tried to discourage him from going out on the beach, but, with Bob Aflanoff and Baby Rebozo, and we sometimes, off the cuff and not any disrespect, we'd sometimes refer to them as the Three Amigos. And it was they were just three guys enjoying each other's company, having some adult beverages, which you're sharing with me tonight also. And he would totally relax. And our challenge was to figure out how to get our classified messages from over here in Walker's Cay over at the delivery times and deliver them to him. And then
this was before drones, I assume.
Absolutely. Before drones and before GPS. And I think I had 3 training trips across in a little 13-foot Boston whaler. And then all of a sudden they said, "Here's the keys." And one of the first times I go down to get in the Boston whaler, it's got about 1/8 of a tank of gas in the tank, and I said, "This isn't going to work."
Well, and funny cut hasn't changed in 50 years, right? You still got to go in and do that big S turn.
I knew when you get the funny cut, I've made it.
Yeah.
I'm safe. I'm no longer going to, shark-infested waters. So it was just like you could breathe easy. But the whole time going across, and when you're carrying a top secret message, we were armed. So I had a 38 with 5 bullets. I don't know how much I'm going to fend off with 5 bullets in a little 2-inch detective special.
Right.
And all I can think of is, I got to get to shore before the Russians get me. That was right when the movie "The Russians Are Coming, the Russians Are Coming."
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, yeah. I think that was my big move was Red Dawn. I don't know if you remember that. We were all arming ourselves in high school with BB guns, waiting for the Russians to drop in. But what do you think? Because I checked with the. I'm always one of these guys. I need to find out everything about it once I get on a subject. But I went all the way to the Nixon Library. And I asked them, I said, "This is Mr. Allen on Walker's Cay," and they're like, "Okay. How many times was Richard Nixon out here?" And they said to me, "Once."
Right.
And you told me today, 31?
I think he's probably was out here about 31 times.
31 times.
But part of the reasoning behind that is that when the president travels out of the country, it really is a candidate to become a state visit. So a state visit means an official greeting party, grip and grin, photo ops, banquets, dinners, lunches, it becomes a kind of a publicity event. And he was coming out here for one reason, that's to relax. He wasn't coming out here to meet people, he wouldn't come out here to do...
And you think that's what he really liked to come out here, is just because
he was isolated, he could think, he had a lot going on in his mind, especially as Watergate moved on. He could come out here and just forget everything that was going on in the world. So... Every movement out here, we call it a movement when he goes somewhere, it would be considered OTR, off the record. And there was really very little documentation. He was out, sometimes the press wouldn't even know he was out here until he was already here.
Yeah. All right, well, you brought up the old WG word, so we're going to have to talk about that. What happened during Watergate? Where were you? Where was he? Because there was rumors that he was around here when it happened.
I believe he was on Walker's Cay the night of the break-in.
So that could be true. Really.
Yeah, well, actually, I think the break-in was early in the morning, and I think he left for Walker's about 7:30 that morning and came out here. But I didn't come out on that trip. But at 8 o'clock in the morning, I delivered the message to H.R. Haldeman to tell him about the break-in, and Mr. Haldeman took the envelope and laid it on the credenza in his hotel suite, and that envelope was still on that credenza when they left on Sunday evening.
Was that right?
So I think I would guess he already knew it, but that's just my surmise.
Wow. I mean, I was a pretty young kid at that point. You weren't very old yourself, but it changed the world.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
We are a different country because of that. Well, it has been tremendous. You have brought your lovely wife out here, Becky, and you informed me earlier that she had never been fishing. and that's a challenge to me.
Yes.
I
want to thank you for creating a conversation for the next several months until she gets off my case for.
So not only did she catch her first fish, but she caught her 7th fish out there. And how many did you get?
I can't remember.
It's pretty hard to. I think you hooked one.
Yes.
Which is always
came up with an empty line. It bit the line, so it had to have been a huge fish that I got.
Well, I do believe you had a mutton on there for a minute, but we had a great time out there today. And
we not only had a great time out there today, I've had a great time since the minute I got back on the island. So
awesome, yeah. I mean, everybody here, and we're going to have a big Taco Tuesday night on the Axis and get a chance to address my crew. I know they're always interested in hearing about a guy like yourself and your experiences here, and a little pep talk never hurts me. And now that you've been out here and you've seen what we're doing, it's changed a lot, as you can see.
Well, it's changed a lot, and the one thing that I've noticed is that the cleanliness. Everything is clean. There's not mold on things. There's not dripping air conditioners that are dripping water everywhere. There's not piles of conch shells. There's not garbage laying around in stacks behind the scenes. Right, but it's really a beautiful place. The plans you have that you've shared with me are just fantastic.
So. We have an audience. I'm sorry. Audience members, any questions? Anybody out there tonight would like to? Henry?
Before we sign off, Don actually brought a few things he'd like to show you.
Wow.
Right. Okay.
Oh, look at that.
One of the things is that on my first trip on Air Force One, probably in 1967, this is a deck of playing cards off Air Force One. They're still sealed. They haven't been used. I'd like you to have those.
Oh, come on. Are you serious? Oh, wow.
And then I have a very old Richard Nixon ballpoint pen that was given out
Come on.
So I want you to have this to put in a display case somewhere.
Please.
And then, of course, there's other things off Air Force One. There's a couple of books of matches right here that are just commemorative matches. But the one thing that's probably the nicest of all of this is that I'm bringing this back home. This is something that belongs here instead of with me. Mr. Applenop held billfish tournaments out here, and I was out here a couple of times. I was out here for one of them in 71 and one of them in 72. So 72 is 2 years longer than the 49 years I've been to. So this is 51 years. So this is a badge from a billfish tournament, the second annual.
Yes, you know that there's hardly any of these left.
Well, I want you to have that. It belongs out here.
Wow.
It really belongs out here.
Geez, we will have a spot for that, sir. Yes, that's wonderful.
And then, of course, if you want to know how dangerous I was, this says I'm armed and dangerous. I give permission to carry a weapon.
You were a handsome guy.
Well, that was a few.
You're still handsome, sir.
Well, as my wife says, a few years and a few pounds ago.
But back then, that was.
I just wanted you to see that one, but
have that to carry.
Right.
You're not giving me that. Okay.
No, I'm going to keep that one.
All right. Well, listen. Before we go here, I know that if I was watching this, we just got to quickly go down the list. You know, what was your favorite thing, or something you could tell us about each one of them? So please, you got to start with LBJ, and we can move on from the latrine talk.
Okay. Well, LBJ, my favorite one was Thanksgiving Day, 6:58 in the morning. I tell everybody that's the day I became an adult. I go over to deliver AP and UPI news summaries, which were very unimportant but necessary. I arrive over there for the 7 o'clock delivery at 7 in the morning. They said, don't worry, just go in there and hang these on the 3 pegs. The 3 pegs were rusty nails hammered into the side of a desk, and I'm thinking, oh my God, that's not very presidential. I learned later that it wasn't. I hang the first 2 on a nail. I take 2 steps back to admire my work, make sure that they're hanging straight. I get ready to take the 3rd one, which was red line. It had any story to do with the presidential family. I'm just ready to hang out the hook, and I look down on the floor, and I see a big old ugly toe hanging out from underneath a pair of pajama legs. I look up, and there he is. President of the United States, no glasses, hair all messed up. He was a big man without his cowboy boots and without his cowboy hat, but it's just bigger than life. He says, good morning, young fella. Good morning, Mr. President. Are they talking about me this morning? I mumbled something. I can't to this day tell you what I said. He says, I'll just take that red line. I handed him the clipboard. I excused myself. I did almost like a military about face. I walked out the door. I closed the door behind me, and then there's a little railroad tie fence about 18 inches off the ground. It's easier to just step over it than it is to unlock it and open it and relock it. I get 1 foot over that fence, getting ready to walk over it, and a door opens behind me. It really needed some WD-40. It was really creaky. And I hear this, "Hey, boy." All I can think of is, cold sweat. "Hey, boy, Vietnam, here you come. You did something wrong." So I turn around, I look, and here comes this dog, Yucky. And this dog, Yucky, is hopping up in his arms, and then he turns around and walks in. So when my wife and I toured the LBJ Ranch about 5 years ago, there was a postcard there with Yucky in his arms. I have a picture of that postcard, but Yucky saved me from Vietnam.
All right, Nixon.
I think my best story with Nixon would probably have been a visit to the opening of the Grand Ole Opry. And we were out there for a week and setting up, and Roy Acuff was the king of country music and kind of the head guy at the Grand Ole Opry, and he was going to teach Richard Nixon, who played the piano that night, he was going to teach him how to use the yo-yo. He was very famous for his ability to use the yo-yo. So we all knew that President Nixon was not known for his coordination. So I talked to one of the staff guys and said, "You better get the people in D.C. to get him some yo-yos, and everybody that walks in that Oval Office this next week, they need to be walking in there with a yo-yo and hand it to him and get him to practice." But 2 days later, they call back and say, "We can't find any yo-yos in D.C." So they launched a Air Force jet from Andrews Air Force Base that came down to Nashville, picked up a case of the official Grand Ole Opry yo-yos and took them back to D.C. And then he practiced, and it still was a flop.
Okay, Ford hit the goalpost without a helmet. He was actually partners with me. I've met two presidents. He was one of them. Partners with my dad early days.
See, Joe Ford, because I got promoted to Chief Warrant Officer on the day that he took the oath of office, I was really technically assigned to the agency. I was kind of in an out-processing mode to go on to my schooling and everything. I did do a couple of very small things in town, but so I was only there for a very short visit. But once you're in the agency and you're in this fraternal group, they share stories, and everybody loved to go out to Aspen. He treated them like family. One of my good friends who was in our agency, he was an audiovisual guy that would be responsible for doing what we're doing today. He also had been a dog breeder, and when Liberty had her pups, he tapped him on the shoulder and says, "I want you and your wife to live in the upstairs residency in the White House for the next month." And he spent like a month and a half living in the White House, and he's getting ready to release a book. But he kind of got turned crossways with our agency as far as the higher ups, because here the president is, he's treating him like a staff person instead of a junior enlisted person, which he was. So he has quite a story to tell also.
Well, and unbelievably, the one president still alive that you served, who is probably one of the most incredible elder statesmen we have in this country, Jimmy Carter.
The last 2 years, our agency has held an alumni reunion in Plains. A year ago, we went, and it was we had 162 members and their spouses and significant others. We've completely filled the old high school. It's turned into basically the museum in Plains. And we had a great time. We told old stories. We told stories that went all the way back to a couple of guys a year ago that was clear back to almost to Roosevelt. And we just had a great time. I just went back 3 weeks ago, and this year our crowd was a little smaller, but we still had a great turnout as far as the stories. Once again, back to the Presidential Service Badge, of which our serial number, my badge number 2162, I was the lowest number badge present both years.
Wow.
So I got to walk away with a couple of oldest one. We shared a lot of stories.
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter was unable to to attend our ceremony, but he knew we were there. We all signed a card, and they took it over and presented it to him. And he's been in hospice care since February.
It's amazing.
And he's been as you said, he's been a great humanitarian after his office. He didn't really have a lot of talent surrounding him when he's in office, so we just kind of talk about all that.
Right. And then my man, we talked about Dixon, Illinois, and Ronald Reagan, and I was just coming in out of high school there, and I remember when he was the assassination attempt. They just let him out of jail, by the way. But what the best thing you can think about our man Ronald Reagan?
Okay, well, there's numerous stories. I already mentioned the Camp David movies. But there was one time that we were changing out a phone up at the ranch in Santa Barbara, and he went out for a horseback ride, and I was the communications strip officer for that site, and so they brought a phone. It was one of the old Ericsson phones that looked like a Cobra, and that was the one that Nancy Reagan liked, and the hang-up switch was in the bottom of it. Well, they wanted me to go change that phone out, but it had a relay in it because it had an open mic, so the Secret Service had modified it. So I'm going down there to hook the phone up, and they were changing the wires that were coming down from up on the top of the hill, and I'm sitting there, and I've got a pair of alligator clips and a headset on listening for the tone, and I'm laying between the wall and the bed about 18 inches, and I'm laying there on the floor for 45 minutes. And I had my earpiece for my radio to hear about presidential movements, and I'm laying there trying to get this phone working. I hear the door open, I look up, here's the president, walks in the bedroom, and he's got basically nothing on but a towel. He's getting ready to get in the shower. So, and I'm laying almost under the bed. So I raise up between the wall and the bed. I said, Mr. President, excuse me. I said, I didn't know you were back. Let me come back and finish this project. And he looks at me and he says, no, if Mama wants her phone fixed, if we're going to both stay out of trouble, you better stay here and fix her phone.
That sounds just like him, by the way. Oh, my gosh.
And we got the phone working, but I got out of there quickly.
Wow. So I tell you, there are, your badge number, but when you look at how many people served that many presidents, I don't think. And look at the era you served. I mean, you'd probably have to go back to the first 5 presidents to have the most interesting time, as the Chinese would say. Those 5 presidents, and add Clinton in there, and we really have something. But
at the time I served, we had the second commander of our agency. The first commander had been there for like 15 years, and the second commander that took over, he said, "I'm going to go out and I'm going to recruit brand new people. When they're still a recruit, they're not going to use Army skills on Army communications. They're going to go to school for Motorola and AT&T and commercial off-the-shelf stuff to support the president. So we're going to teach them what we want them to do rather than bring their old, antiquated Army skills in. So we're going to bring them in." There were probably between 30 and 50 people that came in over the next couple of years, of which I was one of them. A lot of those people stayed for an entire career, retired as sergeant majors and E8s.
And one neat thing you were telling me about how they like small towns because they could really do an in-depth background check, because you could talk to Mike the dentist and Tony the barber and really, who they called your parents.
They called friends of my parents when they were growing up, but they went to my dentist, and when they went to the dentist, the 2 FBI guys flew from D.C. into Kansas, or maybe they came from the field office. They went to the dentist at 8 o'clock in the morning when he's just opening. He invites them in. He offers them coffee. And then one guy says, "I'll take 2 sugars," and the other guy says, "1 cream." And he brings them the coffee. They sit and talk. And I find out that I don't have anything. That they don't disclose anything I'm hiding. Not that I was, but well, who else should we talk to? Well, you might go down to the men's clothing store. And I said, it's like the store, one in town. It's kind of like the restaurant, and one horse town. So they go over to the clothing store. They walk in, and they meet the owner of the clothing store. The first thing he says, "Would you gentlemen like a cup of coffee?" And they kind of, "Well, we just had coffee, but yeah, we'll take a cup of coffee. We just had one, but we'll take one." So he goes back in the back room, and he comes out with 2 cups of coffee. He hands one. He says, "This is the one with 2 sugars, and this is the one with the cream." And they looked, "How'd you know that?" And he said, "Well, we talk."
Wow. Well, story to finish this up. It's been a real pleasure having you and your lovely wife, Becky, here on the island, and you're welcome back here anytime. You are a historian out here. I can't wait to, when we get open, I'd love you to come and do some talks out here. And
I need about 20 minutes warning.
you know, you're not far. I mean, you live in Viagra capital of the world, right over there at Ocala or the villages there. So it's a plane flight away.
We're over the fence from the villages, but there are a lot of wild stories. Some of them are probably true. When you get 140,000 people, and if you get one character out of 1,000, that's still 140.
Hey, I saw the Netflix show. You don't have to, you know.
That's still 140 characters on the town square at night. So it's.
My mother-in-law's moving down there next Thursday.
I'll see if we can find some people to greet her.
Perfect.
But
see, I have an audience. I don't know if we noticed, but we have an audience this time. But
I've met your mother-in-law on the plane coming over, and she's a very nice lady, and I'm sure she'll find her.
Careful, you're married. No, it's just.
Yes, but she'll find her. She'll find a nice set of friends in the villages.
Oh yeah.
And
I'll be, like I said, we're next Thursday, but. Well, thank you so much, sir. And, we're going to have a big Taco Tuesday tonight. I'd really like you to address my crew. But it's been a thrill having you part of the show. And get back to Walker's anytime. I'd love to take you fishing again. Maybe I'll actually catch you a fish next time.
That would be good, because I'm gonna be, she's gonna rib me for probably.
At least till you come back.
Right. Okay. So. Okay. So, well, I really appreciate you all your hospitality. Thank you.